Hello there. It's about time we start our program that is Bottomline Africa. Of course, it is Wednesday, the 20th day of September 2017, a day in which the Supreme Court of Kenya judges spent the full day, about 12 hours, delivering the much-awaited full judgment, one that annulled the re-election of President Uhuru Kenyatta on August 8th. And before I tease in my guest, what we've just been seeing there, some of the reactions, from the lead counsel representing the NASA outfit, that is the prosecution led by Senator James Orengo, talking about that ruling. Let me just dig into some of the things they clearly indicated. The lawyer there clearly said that the matter does not end there, and there is a possibility that the country is going to face a constitutional crisis. We're going to discuss that in length, but for now, our topic of discussion tonight, of course, revolves around the status of health in Africa, and we have a full guest here of doctors in our studio. Let me begin by introducing Dr. Rudy Eggers, who is the WHO country representative. And then we have Dr. Oma Oluga from Kenya, is the Secretary General of KMPDU. And then we have Dr. Mirfen Mpundu from Zambia, is the Executive Director of the Economical Network in Zambia. And last but not the least, we have Mr. Peter Yeboah, who has come to us all the way from Ghana. He's the Executive Director of the Churches Health Association of Ghana. They're going to discuss with me shortly about the status of health in Africa. But for now, let me revisit that top story once again, where the Supreme Court made that full judgment today, a judgment that many Kenyans have been waiting for, a ruling that has been termed as unprecedented, the first ever in Africa. Let me just take you through some of the key Supreme judges, the highlights of that judgment. And part of the bench there was Deputy Chief Justice Philomena Mwilu, who clearly indicated that the IEBC showed reluctance in complying with court orders that asked for access to their servers. She also added that our order, referring to the bench of scrutiny, was a golden opportunity for IEBC to place before the court evidence to debunk the petitioner's claims. She further added, if IEBC had nothing to hide, they will have readily provided access to their logs even before the court order. Now, the Deputy Chief Justice Mwilu continued by saying that non-compliance and failure of IEBC to do as it was ordered must be held against itself. She also added that having spent millions of taxpayers' money, IEBC should have invested in the backup system. And then somebody also made his own ruling today, which lasted for about an hour and a half, was the Chief Justice himself, David Maraga, who said that an election marred with illegalities cannot be respected as representing the majority will of the people. He added that the greatness of a nation lies in its fidelity to the Constitution and adherence to the rule of law. Chief Justice Maraga also said counsel for the respondents argued that elections are about numbers and that for small things the law has no remedy. And he added finally that they were left wondering whether the critical documents be considered genuine with no security features. And then Justice J.B. Ojwang also, in his reading, it took about 2 hours there, and he clearly indicated the transmission of wrong images did not affect the election results. And then there's another judge, Justice Njoki Ndongo, who took about 5 or was it 6 hours in her verdict. She clearly indicated that the verification is an exercise that comprises the entire electoral process. She said the election belongs to everybody, therefore it is in everybody's interest and duty to safeguard it. She also added that the election is the citizens' election. Every Kenyan must protect his or her right to vote. The court must give full weight to the constitutional commitment to free and fair elections. Remember, these are just some of the highlights there from that verdict by the judges. They took about 12 hours to make that, full judgment. And the bench were very kind to the people, because it's not all the judges who went through the full verdict that they had, apart from Justice Ndungu there. For now, let's cross over to Kampala in Uganda, where my colleague Solomon Sarawanja is on standby and is ready to give us some perspective from Uganda, because this is something that is unprecedented. It has happened only in Kenya. Actually, Kenya is the first country in Africa to invalidate a presidential election. Now, Solomon, I understand you're together with a legal expert there, and take us through some of the feedback there you have from Kampala, Uganda.
Well, Yusuf, what I can tell you is that the whole world has been having its eyes on the Kenyan Supreme Court, most especially Africa. What precedents does it send to the African continent? What does it mean for elections across the African continent? That is a debate that Africa has been having. What bold move the Kenyan Supreme Court made, and where does it leave this whole continent? In Uganda, we've had a series of discussions and different debates across the whole political divide, some of them speaking about whether indeed some of the cases that have been brought before the Supreme Court before have been made and ruled in a right manner. But what does the Supreme Court's decision mean for the entire Africa? Joining us on Bottomline Africa is constitutional lawyer Julius Galisonga. To just throw more light now, Julius, thanks for joining us tonight. Well, Raila Odinga has described it as a new era for Africa, and indeed a ruling that will be looked at by several African segments. What do you make of the ruling by the Supreme Court?
First of all, it was a bold statement on the part of not just the Supreme Court of Kenya, but on the part of all Kenyans, that to progress forward as a country, bold decisions must be made, difficult and painful as they may be. You'll see to conduct a presidential election is quite an expensive affair. And of course, the tempers run very high. But the fear for that, the expense and the possibility of a backlash, like we've seen in Kenya in the recent past, did not deter the Supreme Court.
I just wanted to come in here there because we've had several Supreme Court, cases challenging elections in this country. And the ruling has literally been almost the same, including the ruling where the Supreme Court said there was some sort of, rigging. But what do we do? I mean, what are the results that would come out if we annul the elections? Kenya has made a bold move. Do you think it's something Uganda needs to pick up from?
Yes, and from a purely legal point of view, the deterrence has always been looking at the substantiality of any irregularities.
Yep.
Now, the Kenyan Supreme Court looked at this two-way. First of all, it directed the Independent Election and Boundaries Commission to avail its system for inspection in order to determine some of these allegations.
Can that be done in this country?
That order of the Supreme Court was not complied with. Yeah. Now, the Supreme Court said, if you didn't have anything to hide, why did you then not allow access? Why did you not obey the order? And most importantly, the Supreme Court did not restrict itself to that rather thin way of looking at it and saying substantial effect. They looked at it by looking at it as illegality. You see? They looked at it as illegality, say that if something is illegal, then it cannot bring forth something that is legal. Now, that is a new precedent in Africa, whereby you go past and beyond the mere attempt of saying substantial effect, because sometimes you lose the point.
Is it something that Uganda can do? Do you see that happening in Uganda? For example, the Supreme Court said that the IEBC needed to give access to, Raila's team to have access to the servers, but they did not, and they found that odd if the electoral process was transparent. Do you think that it is something that this country can pick, or it can only apply for Kenya, and Ugandan dynamics are a little bit different?
First of all, Kenya is part of the common law system, whereby decisions in other jurisdictions, common law jurisdictions, are cited as precedent. Therefore, Kenya has provided a precedent which then can be used as persuasive authority. We use it to persuade any other court, including that of Uganda, to argue that this order merits the circumstances. Now, that is the first thing. Secondly, we saw in 2001 in Uganda that the election was upheld by a thin majority, which points that if at all we have judges that are not fazed by the fact that there is a sitting government and they make a decision against it, that also points to the fact that it is possible. And most importantly, what has been written after that decision points to the fact that the Supreme Court indeed in Uganda had accepted to annul the election,
But
save for the intimidation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
But the consequences that come along with it, Kenya has made a bold stand.
Yes.
And from what you're saying, that it's a precedence that has been taken, and in common law they can be able to pick it up. All right, so let's look at the final thing. Kenya is going for a re-election. What are your, for a re-election, what are your forecasts in Kenya's political, climate?
My first view is that, of course, the bigger hurdle lies for the sitting president, because we have a group of youths, especially the so-called elite, that never wants to participate in things until they are sure. Now, we are seeing where that particular group, which is a big one, will come out in large numbers, now that they believe that if they voted, their vote will certainly count.
Certainly.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Julius, for joining us on Bottomline.
You're welcome.
Africa. All right, so the whole nation and Africa at large and the whole world will be looking at Kenya. What really does this mean? Will Kenya be able to pass the test of the re-election process? We'll be closely monitoring the situation in Kenya come the re-election date. All right, you're watching Bottomline Africa. We do take a very short break, but return with much more with Yusuf. Stay with us.